Welcome to another episode of This Catholic Life. Conversations about life's ups and downs, big and small, how we deal with every situation imaginable, whatever life throws at us, but still manage to be sensible, practical, and joyful. Today's show is Catholic Identity, a conversation about what makes an organisation Catholic, those who call themselves Catholic, and what they need to do in order to be Catholic. I'm your host, Peter Holmes, and today I'm joined by Rian Galliott, or Box, as he's known around these places. Welcome back, Box. It's been too long.
Thank you. It's been a while, yeah.
It has. Let's get right into it. We should give some background on the topic. There are a number of organisations around the traps. You only have to look in the old phone book or look up on the internet and type Catholic in, and you get lots and lots of agencies, schools, hospitals, educational institutions who call themselves Catholic. So they like to use the name Catholic, clearly, because it's still out there. What are the benefits and drawbacks of, do you reckon, of calling yourself Catholic?
Well, I mean, there is a connection to a larger community, right? The Catholic community and the core, I guess, precepts and things, values that they stand for.
Right.
And so identifying with that sort of already proclaims a mission statement, or a basis of a mission statement, I guess.
Right. So there's an assumption there that they share values, that they have a certain kind of thing, that they're promoting something that we agree with. Now, has to be said that while in the past it might have been a social advantage and perhaps even a business advantage to use the name Catholic, not everyone likes Catholics these days.
Nope. It's understating it, Peter.
Well, I can tell you we get lots of hate mail with regards to this podcast just because we've got the name Catholic in it. It has to be said, though, that all the hate mail we get comes from people who haven't listened to a single minute of the podcast. It comes from them reacting to the name Catholic. So the benefits, you might think the benefits these days are not as big as they used to be. But when you think back, it wasn't that long ago. It's still within living memory of some people that I know that there used to be advertisements in the newspaper, Catholics need not apply. As in there was such a profound anti-Catholic prejudice that you couldn't even go for some jobs. You couldn't even put your hand up for some jobs because people just wouldn't have you. And so calling yourself Catholic very definitely would have prejudiced some people against you back then. So I don't know if we're in a new situation. I just think the prejudice is now expressed in a different way.
Well, I think, if I may, that there was one event in fairly recent memory that sort of proves a counterpoint, which is World Youth Day when it came to Sydney.
Yes.
I remember there was a lot of negativity towards it before it hit.
Yes. And some of it from Catholics.
Yes, some of it from Catholics. And then I think it was the Tuesday, the Tuesday of the World Youth Day week, there was already a very quick turnaround in public opinion about World Youth Day.
Yeah, well, once it got here, I think people were pretty impressed that it was so big and so well organised. And as I said to one local, it's great to see so many very happy young people around. It's such a joy to have them around. And that's been the experience of many cities that have had World Youth Day. But it was interesting, in the lead up to it, most people were worried about how much it would cost, that nobody would want it, and all kinds of things. And thankfully, most of those detractors have now changed their mind. World Youth Day is a fairly big example of something being called Catholic, and it was very Catholic, icons and statues and stuff all over the city of Sydney.
Very in your face. Yeah.
Very much. And yet people took it very well. So it goes to show that the attitude and the behaviour of the young people had a big influence on the fact that they were tolerating some of these other weirdo things that Catholics were doing in town. So let's come back to that then. What are the rules about calling yourself Catholic? Well, if the Pope shows up, you probably get to call yourself Catholic. So World Youth Day gets a tick for that one.
It's a good point. Yeah.
But if you're starting a school or if you've got an organisation, I worked for an archdiocesan agency, Catholic Adult Education, and we called ourselves Catholic because we were an official representative body of the Archdiocese of Sydney. And you've worked in several different jobs, all of which were in some way connected to the Archdiocese in some way. So in that case, we're directly connected to and answerable to the Archdiocese of Sydney and therefore the Archbishop. But there are still plenty of other people out there calling themselves Catholic.
There are indeed. And I think one of the things about that is a lot of people, as we spoke about before, as we mentioned before, it's that sort of linking to this identity. And the problem is whether our identity as a community or group matches with that.
Right. Now, can you be a bit more explicit about that? So, for example, we've got schools, we've got hospitals, we've got media organizations, etc.
Definitely. Well, one thing I've encountered, and as you know, I've worked in many different capacities in the church. One thing that's thrown about a lot is, oh, but we're a business,
right?
Or oh, but we're this or that. And admittedly, it's never easy saying that you're that particular business, but also a Catholic,
right?
Business of that type.
So why isn't it easy?
Well, I think, and that while you get the privileges and the community of Catholicism when you say that you're Catholic, that it also calls you to a particular way of living or particular standard.
Right. Now, when you say standard, does that mean the quality of your goods has to be of a standard, or is it about the way you conduct business or the way you treat your employees? Or
I think it's across the board. There has to be an integrity. There has to be a charity to how you conduct business and how you conduct interpersonal relationships.
Yep.
And there has to be a hopefulness as well to it.
Right.
Because we are a people of hope.
Yeah, we are. But I mean, with respect, calling ourselves a people of hope is just a little bit vague.
Yes, it is.
While we are a people of hope, there's still some very practical, pragmatic things that need to happen in order to be Catholic. So calling ourselves Catholic means that our business needs to represent the name Catholic well, or at least not sully the name. So, for example, I know of at least 2 businesses in Sydney who have been asked to change their practices by the Archbishop over the last 2 decades or so because they were using the name Catholic and something they were doing with that name wasn't in keeping with the way Catholics work. So one involved gambling rules and the other one was to do with what they were actually promoting. And so firstly, the product, we can't call something Catholic and then do something immoral.
Yes.
Exploitative or false, using false information or telling lies. Hence why, by the way, if anyone's listening to this, hence why it's so scandalous when we find out that someone who claims to be Catholic is telling a lie. Not just that lies are bad, but that they are representing Catholicism when they speak. And that means it's a doubly bad thing. When someone tells a lie, but also how they treat their employees has to come into this.
Yes, I think there's definitely an element there, and it's reflected in our own lives as individual Catholics that we go to confession and we try to do better when we've fallen, and so I think part of that is the atmosphere and the community of perseverance and trying. So there are times when things will happen. But the ability for the community or the business to turn around and say, look, we've made a mistake. How can we do better?
Well, that's both as an institution, but also internally. So, for example, you mentioned confession absolution there. That's a very important part of an understanding of a Catholic world. We're not claiming to be perfect.
No.
We're not claiming to always get it right. We're not claiming to be the perfect workplace or the perfect business or anything. What we're claiming to do is people who are accountable, both to each other, but also to God, and that we conduct ourselves with that in view. And that when we make a mistake, we go, righto, we stuffed it up. But in a Catholic organisation, there is a certain level of forgiveness where we say, okay, we're not going to crucify you for the smallest mistake, but that actions have consequences, which is what penance is about. But the consequences are always redemptive, that they're always leading us back to a restoration of community, a restoration of trust, a restoration of the goodness that we strove for in the first place. So being Catholic means that we treat each other with the dignity and respect that comes from acknowledging that each person is made in the image of God. Each person has their own flourishing and dignity.
So I've got a few friends who are lawyers, and we play games together. We catch up regularly virtually,
right,
to play games and chat. A few Catholic mates and I. And one of the things that's come up often, we discuss topics like this. One of the topics that come up often is the fact that businesses and corporations are legally considered single entities.
Right.
And reflecting on what that means if I, as a single entity myself, and how that sort of microcosm and macrocosm kind of view of it reflects on the thought of Catholic identity as a business.
Yeah, because the business is made up of many people, but each one of those individuals, when they're wearing the company badge, and even if they're off duty and people know that they work for the company, they still reflect those company values.
Yes.
It's worth mentioning that many Catholic organizations, they just simply can't discriminate against non-Catholics in jobs that don't specifically require you to be Catholic. So, for example, some certain roles like teaching roles, pastoral roles, obviously have to be set aside for people who share the convictions and the passion for the Catholic faith. But, you know, the gardener doesn't need to be a practicing Catholic in order to be a good gardener. And we were talking about, before we come to this recording box, we were talking about artists. An artist doesn't necessarily have to be a devout Catholic in order to paint excellent art.
Yes.
There's all kinds of things that can be done in an organization, deliveries, function, administrative functions, all kinds of things that can be done very well by non-Catholics. And so Catholic organizations have attempted to talk about Catholic identity and Catholic values in their organization, but don't necessarily insist that their employees are Catholic. That's all very true and valid. The question comes how far do you water that down? And how far does it get to the point where we talk about Catholic values because there's a plaque on the wall, but everyone here doesn't actually believe it, and we're just going to do our business?
That's right. You sort of dilute the identity in favor of those in the organization that aren't Catholic themselves.
Yeah, and who answers to whom with respect to, are we living this? Are we living up to this standard? Do we even understand what this standard is? And that was the point that I came across a number of times in various organizations I've come across, where I've asked the question about Catholic identity just as a matter of interest, and I couldn't find anyone right up to the CEO who was able to express coherently what it meant to be a Catholic organization.
Yeah.
They used all these examples, like you said, we're a people of joy. What does that mean?
What does that mean? How does that practically...
Or we follow Catholic values. Can you name any of those values? What are they?
That's right.
What are they?
Yeah.
In other words, it was a kind of a nominal thing that they didn't actually understand. Now, in other cases, people have very, very strong ideas about what Catholic means, which don't necessarily agree with the Catechism. Or perhaps... And this is something that's quite dangerous, not so much here in Australia, but I've seen it very much in other countries at the moment. Some Catholic organisations, very strongly claiming to be promoting Catholic values, do so in a way that is derisive and derogatory and nasty, which don't reflect Catholic understanding of the dignity and respect for other human beings.
But this actually, it brings me back to another conversation I had not too long ago about a type of elitism that happens even in any community, but amongst Catholics it's definitely there. And I think the Pope sometime last year wrote about it, talking about this intellectual elitism that happens, and sometimes whether it's from truth or just pride of pushing your own agenda.
I think he was dignifying it with a term. If he called it intellectual elitism, I'm not seeing much intellectual about it.
Yeah, but I mean, it happens in almost every group or community.
Yep.
It's one of the things that really creates that schism, and I think is one of the things to really first look out for.
Yeah. Well, let's use an analogy. When I played cricket there's always one or two guys on the cricket team who have the whitest clothes, who, insist you wash them with, I don't know, some wonder bleach or something every week, who absolutely insist on rubbing the ball a certain way and you have to walk in a certain way. And they were purists, basically. Now, we all giggled at them and used it to tease them a little bit, but you learned a little bit more about cricket from looking at their habits. What would be a problem is if the captain and a few others in the team absolutely insisted that we all slavishly followed these things or we get kicked out of the team. That becomes an issue. It's one thing to look at an ideal or perhaps someone who's very, very good at putting strict requirements on things as that's interesting, that's taught us something. It's quite something else to say this is the baseline standard. You must be this fanatical, otherwise you're out.
Yeah, and it's something. It's happened all through history, but especially in recent history, it's become quite a thing of gatekeeping.
Right.
You must do A, B, and C, otherwise you're not a true fan, or A, B, and C, otherwise you're not truly a Catholic.
Have you been kicked out of a Reddit community, Ryan?
I'm not saying anything.
Well, yes. I'm guilty of that too. I think we've had some conversations with our producer about whiskey, and when I said, single malt whiskey, or you're not in it, and it was probably elitist in that respect. And I think as long as it's on the level of joking around with friends, and it's not excluding people from enjoyment of something, that's one thing. But in terms of a Catholic identity, a lot of people get confused when they see someone, an organization or someone who's using the name Catholic, claiming to represent Catholicism, and they seem to be speaking directly against the Catholic faith or against something the Pope's just said, or against, the authority, the Archbishop of Sydney. And you think, well, hang on, what makes something Catholic if it's not in line with the Archbishop of Sydney, the Pope, what the Catechism says?
And there are those. Cool, and I'm loath to use the word values, but for lack of a better word in my head at the moment, there are certain core values, certain core principles, I should probably say.
That's a better word.
That we adhere to because those are unchanging.
Right.
The capital T traditions, so to speak.
Yeah, the objective truths.
Yeah, objective truths. And I think that is definitely something that comes across in how one lives their lives. And something that should be reflected, as we've spoken about briefly before. I mentioned it when Tolkien was writing the story of, Middle Earth in any of the novels. It wasn't so much that he wanted to make it Catholic; it's that his Catholicism infused the work,
right,
with his with the ideals and the beliefs that he held. And I think that's something that happens with any organization if there are people there who adhere to those values, those principles.
Yes, principles come from outside of us. Values are something we value, literally. Yes. It's a passive sort of thing. Yeah. In terms of Catholic organizations, though, let's come back to how they operate being reflected in their organization. So if you come to a Catholic business, or perhaps a Catholic who owns and runs a business, or even a businessman within an organization, what you should expect is honesty. What you should expect is hard work. They're not a pushover. They're not a charity necessarily. They might be charitable in the way they go about their work. But as you said, it's still a business. But in the way they conduct their business, they would be scrupulously fair, provide you with the best product that they can within the resources they have, and that they do so in a way which does not exploit other people.
Maintain integrity.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. I mean that integrity of truth and personhood and what it is to be. Yeah.
The lack of exploitation is one of the reasons, for example, that the Sydney Archdiocese has the Anti-Slavery Task Force. And one of the first things the Anti-Slavery Task Force did was make sure that our own supply lines were not using exploitative sources, which I'm very grateful. We've already had John McCarthy on the podcast and talked to him about that. But I encourage anyone who's listening, go and check out the Anti-Slavery Task Force website attached to the Archdiocese here. And it's got a list of sources and products which will help us all as Catholics live out that particular ideal. I have to say, though, my experience working in various Catholic organizations, and some Lutheran ones and some Baptist ones, is that, human beings aren't perfect. And that, you have all the same frictions and silliness that goes on in any organization.
That's right.
The question isn't whether that happens, but how we actually deal with it. How is it resolved? What ideals do we strive for? What do we hold ourselves up to?
That's right.
I remember having a discussion with someone in the diocese about whether we should keep a human resources department because that was anti-Catholic. And I basically said, well, we have to call it that because that's what everybody else calls it. And
it is one of those areas of that handshaking between, I guess, secular life and our Catholic living. Just as you said before about people working in Catholic industry and businesses that aren't necessarily Catholic themselves. And we're meant to. I mean, I would not... I generally wouldn't... I guess I wouldn't work for an organization that's Catholic if they didn't have people there working there that weren't Catholic themselves, because I think we're meant to have that immersion in the world and with people of the world. We're not meant to be just separate for the sake of being separate. We hold ourselves a fortress. Yeah, we hold ourselves apart for God so that we can bring the message to those we encounter. And so what happens is, as you know, in so many communities you would have experienced, Peter, when people do that, they forget how to speak to people out there in the world. They forget how
they're stuck in an enclave and they only talk to Catholics. They forget that they're talking in the Catholic language and nobody can understand what they're talking about.
That's right. There's so many times in conversations, even at university sometimes, or some other groups, having worked in some of those places, that I've had to define things for people that weren't Catholic themselves.
Yeah, I'm afraid I still have. I used to joke with my friends that I speak Protestant and Catholic because I came from the Protestant world. And so when Catholics use that particular language that they think everyone understands, I have a little giggle to myself about the Protestants who are listening or the people who are not Catholic or Christian at all listening in, going, "What does that even mean?" Or they think of something different. But you're right. Having friends who aren't Catholic actually refines us as Catholics. It makes us better Catholics because we have to rethink everything we're talking about, everything we're doing, and we know that we are accountable for it, that we actually do represent something. It matters that we call ourselves Catholic, even if we're in a non-Catholic organization. As the sole Catholic in that place, we still represent something. So calling ourselves Catholic is an important aspect of being Christ-like, to bringing Christ into that workplace.
Yeah. Well, there's an old saying that someone told me a long time ago, which is, you show mastery in a thing when you can explain it to a 10-year-old and they can understand it.
Martin Luther said that.
Oh, right. Okay.
Well, he said basically any idiot can explain a complicated thing. It takes a genius to explain it to a very simple person.
Right. Yeah. So it's one of those things that I've tried to carry in how I also speak about our faith when out there and even at work to people without assuming that they're Catholic. So that they can understand what I'm doing and why.
I'd like to finish this, if I could, on this point, and that is that I don't believe that Catholic identity, Catholic values that we've talked about here are prohibitive or inhibitive of business. I think if you are an honest businessman, you get a reputation for being honest, and therefore you get more long-lasting clients. If you have a reputation for producing good quality goods in an honest way, within an honest timetable and scrupulously fair in the way you do it, then you're going to get clientele who respect you for that, and people will go there for that because that's worth the money. Following Catholic values is not just a way to get into the Catholic world, it's actually a way to flourish as individuals and as businesses.
That's right.
And if you treat your employees with that kind of dignity, as if they are made in the image of God, whatever they happen to believe at this point, and you treat them with that respect and dignity, then you get the best out of them. They want to work for you. So yeah, it's all good value. That's probably enough for this week's podcast. If today's discussion got you thinking, arguing, maybe with your boss, let us know. Join us in the discussion on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or Discord. Write us a review on iTunes. We're a uniquely Australian Catholic podcast, and we think that's an idea worth getting behind. Bring your friends in, tell them about the podcast, and ask them some questions too. We'll be back next week, though. That's all for now. Thank you for listening to This Catholic Life.